Good afternoon. This is Kathleen Drew, Chair of the FSEC Council. Calling to order our monthly meeting for June. Ms. Grantham, will you call the roll of the General FSEC Council?
Certainly, Chair Drew. Department of Commerce.
Oh, there it goes. Thanks. Elizabeth Osborne, present.
Department of Ecology.
Eli Levitt, present.
Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Mike Livingston, present.
Department of Natural Resources. Utilities and Transportation Commission.
Stacy Brewster, present.
Chair, there is a quorum of the regular council.
Thank you. At this time, I'm going to call an executive session. The purpose of this session is listed under RCW 4230-110 sub 1. And the subject is the Whistling Ridge Energy Project Site Certification Agreement. And the purpose is discussing with legal counsel representing the agency matters relating to potential litigation or legal risks of the proposed actions to approve, transfer, and to extend the Whistling Ridge Energy Project Site Certification Agreement. We plan to return by 1:30. Thank you. Good afternoon. This is Kathleen Drew, Chair of the FSEC, Energy Facility Site Evaluation Council, bringing our monthly meeting back to order now that our executive session has closed. Ms. Grantham, will you please call the roll?
Certainly. And Chair Drew, really quick, would you like me to recall the role of the regular council or just start from the local government and optional state agency council?
Go ahead and start with the local government.
Perfect. Okay, so for local government and optional state agencies, for the Horse Heaven Council for Benton County, Ed Brost. For the Badger Mountain, for Douglas County, Jordan Julio.
Jordan Julio, present.
For Wautoma Solar, for Benton County, Dave Sharp.
Dave Sharp, present.
Washington State Department of Transportation, Paul Gonseth.
Paul Gonseth, present.
Hop Hill Solar for Benton County, Paul Crouppen. For Carriager Solar for Klickitat County, Matt Childs. And for Wallula Gap for Benton County, Adam File.
Adam File is here.
For Assistant Attorney Generals, John Thompson.
Present.
Jenna Slocum.
Present.
Zach Packer.
Present.
And do we have any administrative law judges on the line?
Dan Gerard.
I have Mr. Gerard. And was there someone else present?
Yeah, Judge Torum.
Thank you. For
And
FSEC staff. Oh,
Also Judge Bradley.
thank you, Judge Bradley. And I'll go over to FSEC staff. I'll be calling those anticipated to possibly speak today. For FSEC staff, Sonia Bumpus.
Present.
Amy Hofkemeyer.
Present.
Sarah Randolph.
Present.
Sean Green.
Present.
Lance Caputo.
Present.
John Barnes.
Present.
Joanne Snarsky.
Present.
Martin McMurray.
Present.
And Trevin Taylor.
Present.
And for operational updates, Kittitas Valley Wind Project,
Jared Cassidy, present.
Wild Horse Wind Power Project,
Jennifer Galbraith, present.
Grace Harbor Energy Center, Chehalis Generation Facility,
Jeremy Smith, present.
Columbia Generating Station,
Dennis Mekinagich, present.
Columbia Solar,
Thomas Cushing, present.
Goose Prairie Solar.
Jacob Christ, present.
And do we have anyone present for the Council for the Environment?
Yes, Sarah Reineveld and Yuri Korol are present.
Thank you, Chair. There is a quorum for all councils.
Thank you. Moving on to our proposed agenda. Council members, you see that in front of you. Is there a motion to adopt the proposed amendment, a proposed agenda?
Lenny Young, so moved.
Mike Livingston, second.
Thanks. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? The agenda is adopted. Moving on to the meeting minutes. First, the May 15, 2024 monthly council minutes. I did not find any, first of all, let's have a motion to approve the monthly council minutes.
Move to approve the council minutes from May.
Second?
Second, Eli Levitt.
I did not find any corrections or changes. Did anyone find anything in that set of minutes? Okay, all those in favor of approving those monthly council minutes, please say aye.
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 All those opposed? Minutes are approved. Moving on to, we have the May 16th Whistling Ridge transfer and extension request meeting minutes, and there are two sets of minutes. So we can take them as one, but I do have corrections on both. So let's go ahead and move to approve the May 16th, 2024 Whistling Ridge transfer and extension request meeting minutes. Motion,
Stacy Brewster, so moved.
second.
Elizabeth Osborne, second.
Okay, so the changes that I have are for the transfer request, page 21, line 1. In the sentence, quote, "No secret addendum is required," it should say SEPA, S-E-P-A. Then moving on to the extension request. Are there any other corrections from that set of minutes from anybody? Okay. Then moving on to the extension request, I have a few. On page 15 line, page 17, line 15, the word city should be EFSEC, E-F-S-E-C. Page 22, line 22, the word fourth should be forest. On page 53, line 6, I believe 2013 should be 2023. And on page 54, line 2, EPA should be BPA, letter B as in boy. Okay. Any other corrections or edits? All those in favor, please say aye of the minutes as amended.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The minutes are approved. Moving on now to our operational updates. Kittitas Valley Wind Project. Mr. Cassidy.
Good afternoon, Chair Drew, FSEC Council and staff. This is Jared Cassidy with EDP Renewables for the Kittitas Valley Wind Power Project. We had nothing non-routine to report for the period.
Thank you. Wild
Thank you.
Horse Wind Power Project, Ms. Galbraith.
Yes, thank you, Chair Drew, council members, and FSEC staff. For the record, this is Jennifer Galbraith from Puget Sound Energy, representing the Wild Horse Wind Facility. And for the month of May, we had no non-routine updates.
Thank you. Chehalis Generation Facility, Mr. Smith.
Good afternoon, Chair Drew, council members and staff. This is Jeremy Smith, the operations manager representing the Chehalis Generation Facility. I have nothing non-routine to report for the month of May.
Thank you. Grays Harbor Energy Center, Mr. Sharon or Ms. Randolph.
That would be me today. Thank you, Chair Drew and council members. For the record, this is Sarah Randolph, site specialist for Grays Harbor. The public comment period began May 20th and ends today. There have not been any public comments at this time.
Following the public comment period, the draft permit documents, as well as responses to any substantive comments, will go to the EPA for a 45-day review. The acid rain permit application is under review. There are no other updates to report at this time.
Are there any questions for Ms. Randolph? Thank you. Columbia Solar, Mr. Cushing.
Good afternoon, Chair Drew, council members, FX staff. This is Thomas Cushing speaking on behalf of Columbia Solar. There are no non-routine updates to report.
Thank you. Columbia Generating Station and WNP 1 and 4, Mr. Mehinagic.
Good afternoon, Chair Drew and council members. This is Dennis Mehinagic on behalf of Columbia Generating Station and Washington Nuclear Projects 1 and 4. I do have one small update under environmental compliance. So now an evaluation of the halogenation dehalogenation system was completed by Energy Northwest and the system vendor following the total residual halogen maximum daily discharge limit exceedance in March 2024. The system experienced a malfunction due to incorrect data inputs after firewall maintenance. To prevent reoccurrence, any future firewall maintenance that could affect the halogenation dehalogenation system will require approval by the chemistry department prior to implementation. Additionally, the vendor has implemented an extra layer of surveillance for the system in case of network feed lockup. If data inputs become frozen, an automatic notification will be sent to the chemistry department for verification. That is all I had.
Are there any questions from council members? Thank you. Goose Prairie Solar Project Update, Mr. Christ.
Yeah, thank you and good afternoon, Chair Drew, FSEC Council and staff. So this is Jacob Christ, Senior Project Manager on behalf of Brookfield Renewable North America. So providing the Goose Prairie Solar Project update. So the project remains on schedule, actually ahead of schedule. Some upcoming milestones have shifted for commissioning activities due to some independent engineer review that we're working through. The start of our energization for test purposes will now be July 1st. It was originally expected to be June 18th. We currently sit at, I guess Brookfield considers the site mechanically complete at this time, pending that IE mechanical completion certificate. And then on or around September 30th, we're looking to have a utility sign off and consider the project COD. All major scope items are complete. Module racking, trackers, and substation. Cleanup items and punch list items are underway, such as road repairs and improvements to project roads and neighboring roads. Backfeed of the substation is complete up to the inverters, where we have load break disconnects locked and tagged, so we cannot flow power out. And we, again, punch list items, hot commissioning, and remaining BPA testing is basically the remaining scope for our site at this point. O&M site certificate deliverables are in draft with Brookfield O&M team and Tetra Tech. There was no discharge on the site reported for the month of May. We do continue to receive frequent inspections weekly from WSP, and the latest that included ecology and WSP occurred on Tuesday, June 18th, so Tuesday of this week, to inspect BMPs and vegetation growth. And what you're seeing on the screen, I did submit a couple photos for all the folks to see. If there's any questions on the updates, please let me know.
Thank you and congratulations. And we are seeing on our screen here the photos from the site. And those are major accomplishments. And we look forward to perhaps having a time around September 30th to perhaps have some sort of official congratulations on the completion of the project.
Thank you.
Any other? Thank you. High Top and Ostria project updates. Ms. Randolph.
Thank you, Chair Drew and council members. For the record, this is Sarah Randolph, Site Specialist for High Top and Ostria. FSEC staff are continuing to work with the developer on pre-construction requirements and plans. We are reviewing the initial site restoration plan, or the ISRP, and anticipate providing it to the council for your review ahead of the July council meeting. We have no other updates at this time.
Thank you. Badger Mountain project update. Ms. Snarsky.
Thank you, Chair Drew, and good afternoon, council members. For the record, this is Joanne Snarsky, the siting specialist for Badger Mountain Solar. Between May 28th and June 7th, supplemental fieldwork was initiated on wetland characterization and cultural resources. However, the consultants were not able to access certain portions of the site. On June 3rd, Chair Drew and FSEC staff participated in government-to-government consultation with the Colville Confederated Tribe Business Council and Culture Committee. That's it. May I answer any questions?
Thank you. And that is true. We had a session with the Colville Cultural Committee and appreciate their comments, and we'll continue to work with them going forward. And thank you very much. Watoma Solar project update. Mr. Caputo.
Thank you, Chair Drew and council members. On May 20th of this year, FSEC issued a mitigated determination of non-significance on this project. The MDNS identified probable impacts to the natural and man-made environments and listed measures to mitigate these impacts to a level of non-significance. The MDNS was published in the state SEPA register, followed by a 14-day public comment period. The comment period ended June 4th. FSEC received 5 responses. On Friday, June 16th of this year, FSEC issued a revised MDNS and published it in the state SEPA register. The revised MDNS does not require a public comment period. The revised MDNS contained language clarifying mitigation measures. Before you today is a request from the applicant for an extension of his application for site certification. The present expiration date is June 28th. The applicant is requesting the processing time of the Watoma Solar application be extended to December 31st, 2024. Staff recommends the council approve the request. On Tuesday, June 18th, FSEC provided a draft order commencing the process adjudicating the issue of land use on the project. A copy of this order is contained in your packets. Staff received one edit on the draft language, which we'll see on page 5 of the document, to delete the word undersigned. Thank you. May I answer any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Caputo. So we have a few items before us on this. Are there any questions about the MDNS or the revised MDNS that I think you received for our SEPA officials? Okay, then moving on to the extension request. Did we have this posted, Mr. Caputo?
Yes.
And did we receive any comments on the extension request?
Negative.
Thank you. So in front of us is the extension request. Is there a motion to approve the extension request to be extended to December 31st, 2024 for the Watoma Solar application?
Lenny Young, so moved.
Thank you. Second.
Eli Levitt, second.
Any discussion? I think it's reasonable given the project course in front of us with the limited adjudication. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. The extension is approved. The next item we have is the order commencing adjudication. What I would bring council members' attention to is the issues on page 3 for adjudication. In that RCW 8050-090 4B provides that if the environmental impact of the proposed facility in an application for certification is not significant or will be mitigated to a non-significant level under RCW 4321C-031, the council may limit the topic of the public hearing conducted as an adjudicative proceeding under the section to whether any land use plans or zoning ordinances with which the proposed site is determined to be inconsistent should be preempted. And as you see, and we discussed, that MDNS has been issued. And so the council in this adjudicative order will limit the topic of the adjudicative proceeding to whether the council should recommend to the governor that the state preempt the land use plan, zoning ordinances, or other development regulations for the site for the alternative energy resource proposed by the applicant. And what conditions, if that preemption is approved, what conditions the council should include in a draft certification agreement to consider state or local governmental or community interests affected by the construction or the operation of the project. Are there any questions from the Wautoma council members?
No. Could you hear me? This is Dave Sharp.
I could. Thank you, Mr. Sharp, and for identifying yourself. Appreciated. All those in favor of, can we have a motion to approve this adjudicative order?
Buddy Young, so moved.
Second?
Elizabeth Osborne, second. Thanks for controlling.
Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the adjudicative order, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. And that concludes our items for the Wautoma Solar Project today. Moving on to the Hop Hill Solar Project update, Mr. Barnes.
Thank you, Chair Drew and council members. For the record, this is John Barnes, FSEC staff for the Hop Hill application. The applicant continues to complete studies and reports needed to make a SEPA determination. We continue to coordinate and review the application with our contractor, contracted agencies, and tribal governments. Are there any questions?
Carriger Solar Project update, Snarsky.
Thank you, Chair Drew. For the record, again, this is Joanne Snarsky, the siting specialist for Carriger Solar. FSEC staff will soon be making a final assessments regarding the revised visual impacts assessment provided to us by the applicant. Staff will meet next week to address the applicant's mitigation proposal to reduce significant impacts to visual aesthetics. Additionally, FSEC received a revised cultural resource survey from the applicant on May 22nd. The revision has been sent to the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation and the Yakima Tribe. We anticipate a response in the coming weeks. And that's it. May I answer any questions?
Are there any questions for Ms. Snarsky on Carriger Solar Project? Thank you. Wallula Gap application update, Mr. Barnes.
For the record, this is John Barnes, staff for the Wallula Gap application. FSEC received application review comments from Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife on June 10th, 2024. These comments were forwarded to One Energy on June 11th, 2024. Staff are preparing a data request, which we anticipate being sent to One Energy in the coming week. Staff are continuing to manage review of the application with our contractor, contracted agencies, and tribal governments. Are there any questions?
Are there any questions? Whistling Ridge, transfer and extension requests. Mr. Caputo.
Thank you, Chair Drew and Council. The applicant, Twin Creek Timber, submitted 2 petitions to the council in March 2022. The first petition requesting approval of a transfer of controlling interests of the site certification agreement from SDS Lumber to Twin Creek Timber. The second request is to amend the SCA, site certification agreement, by extending the expiration date of their agreement until November 2026. On May 16, 2024, the council convened separate public hearings on these requests. 24 comments were submitted online, through email, and/or at the public hearings. 21 comments were opposed to the petitions. Objections referenced range from legal and environmental issues to public notice and viewshed concerns. We also received comments in favor of the petitions. Staff requests the council consider these requests and direct us to prepare any documentation reflecting the council's position. Thank you. May I answer any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Caputo? At this point, I'd like to perhaps take up the transfer request and have discussion on that and any questions or comments from council members. I would like to perhaps start us off with a question for our council, Mr. Thompson. And in looking at the requirements for a transfer, can you briefly summarize for us what the applicable criteria are for a transfer?
Certainly. So the particular agency rule that applies to transfers of site certification agreements is WAC 463 66-100. And the criteria for the council to apply in one of these requests is I want to focus in on one part that I think is probably most germane, is subpart 4B, where it says that the applicant, that the council may approve the transfer if the applicant agrees to abide by all of the terms and conditions of the site certification agreement to be transferred and has demonstrated it has the organizational, financial, managerial, and technical capability and is willing and able to comply with the terms and conditions of the certification agreement being transferred. So that's really the core of it.
Council members, you've heard the criteria. Is there a conversation or discussion about that? Ms. Brewster.
It seems clear that the project as approved initially would not be the same project that they would be able to put together. And so therefore it seems we're not discussing the same project, and I don't see how that applies.
I think too that the key for me is whether or not the applicant certificate holder, I mean, if it's transferred, has not demonstrated that they have currently the organizational and technical capability. There have mentioned that there are partners out there, but they are not under agreement at this point in time in order to have the capacity to finish the project, even as it was put forward more than a decade ago. Is there a motion from the council or any other discussion regarding this transfer request?
Chair
Mr.
Drew,
Livingston?
yeah, going through. Yeah, I just wanted to add on some of the concerns that I would have with just a direct transfer right now is related to the fact that it's been 10 years since we've done all of the background work. The SCA was created, approved by the governor, and the landscape has changed, the population's changed, the technology's changed. There's just a variety of different components to this that we would need to consider in a new project, essentially. Possibly taller turbines we understand may need to be added in. And for these reasons, I would make a motion that we deny the request for the transfer.
Second?
Casey Brewster, second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to the extension request, which at this point in time would be moot without the transfer request. But are there also comments about, and I think we heard some of them in terms of the change in the landscape, in the rules, in the process that has been significantly changed since this project was originally approved. If there is a desire on behalf of an applicant to have a project, as Mr. Livingston stated, it would have to be significantly changed. And therefore, because the SEPA work would have to be done again, because all of the other work is required, would be similar to a new application, I myself think that it would be much more appropriate for the owners of the property now to submit a new application. Other comments? All those, is there a motion to deny the extension request?
Chair Drew, if I could make just a procedural point. I noticed in the prior motion and then this one, you phrased it in terms of a motion to deny. I wonder if it might make more sense to make it a motion to direct staff to prepare decision documents consistent
you.
with that tentative decision. Yeah.
Okay, let's take a step back. If we could ask the staff to draw up documents to deny both the request for transfer and the request for extension. Is there a second?
Buddy Young, second.
Discussion? All those in favor to direct the staff to draw up the necessary documents, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion is approved. Thank you. Moving on to the Horse Heaven Wind Farm project update, Ms. Hofkemeyer.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Drew and council members. For the record, this is Amy Hofkemeyer for the Horse Heaven Wind Project. FSEC staff submitted the Horse Heaven recommendation report to the governor on April 29th as directed by the council at the April 17th council meeting. On May 20th, the applicant, Scout Clean Energy, submitted a petition for reconsideration to FSEC for reconsideration of the council's recommendation. This filing met the 20-day filing requirement for petitions for reconsideration as defined in Washington Administrative Code 463-30335, Section 1. Benton County, Yakima Nation, and Tri-City Cares submitted responses to the applicant's petition on June 3rd, meeting the 14-day reconsideration due date as defined in WAC 463-30335, Section 3. The council issued its notice of intent to defer decision on Tuesday, June 18th. On May 23rd, the governor responded to the council recommendation with comments for council reconsideration. The governor requested that the council reconsider the conditions and mitigation in the draft site certification agreement and provide a response to his office within 90 days by August 21st. Staff have reviewed the response letter and have prepared a presentation on mitigation measures within the final EIS that we think are most directly related to the request in the governor's letter. Are there any questions before we move to the presentation? Mr. Green?
There we go. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Hello, Chair Drew and Council. For the record, I am Sean Green, FSEC staff, and I'll be giving a presentation just summarizing some of the content of the governor's letter and identifying the mitigation measures that we believe are most directly related to his requests. So as Ms. Hofkemeyer said, we received the letter on May 23rd, 2024. The governor requested in the letter that the council complete its reconsideration within 90 days, which would be August 21st, 2024. By statute, council reconsiderations are must be conducted expeditiously according to RCW 80-5100. There is no statutory requirement on a number of days through which the council must complete its reconsideration. But in the governor's letter, the request that the council is directed to reconsider is the mitigation that were included within the draft SCA. The governor has indicated a preference for an approach that would be, quote, more narrowly tailored to the specific impacts identified, end quote, and is, quote, consistent with achieving the full or near full clean energy generation capacity of the proposed project, end quote. In addition, the governor has requested that the council develop new measures that adhere to the quote existing robust record and design mitigation requirements, reduce the impacts wherever reasonably feasible, and do not substantially reduce the generation capacity of the proposed project, end quote. Staff have reviewed the mitigation measures included within the draft site certification agreement and identified 3 measures that we believe, if implemented, would reduce the generation capacity of the proposed project. Their inclusion here is not to be understood as a recommendation from staff for the retention, alteration, or removal of these mitigation measures. We are just presenting them as the most relevant for the council's deliberations. The first measure is vegetation 10, which is the prohibition of siting solar arrays on rabbit brush shrubland or WDFW designated priority habitat types, the only one of which that is within the project lease boundary is shrub step. This measure was intended to address project impacts to wildlife habitat, and a summary of the affected project components are first I should say, the difference between proposed solar siting area and proposed solar footprint. The solar siting area is the micrositing area upon which all solar panels will be placed. The solar footprint is the current proposed placement of solar arrays. So the solar siting area is not subject to change. The solar footprint could change throughout the micrositing process of the project. But as currently proposed, approximately 10% of the proposed solar siting area would be excluded from production as part of this mitigation measure, and about 1.5% of the current proposed solar footprint. Are there any questions on this measure? Yes.
Just a question.
Yes.
Can you repeat that last part that you were talking about?
Sure. The difference between the two solar, okay. So the solar siting area is the total area, or the area in which all solar panels will be placed as part of the draft SCA. The current solar footprint is the current layout proposed by the applicants. So the current layout may change during the micrositing process, but the final disposition of all solar arrays will be somewhere within the solar siting area that was proposed.
Okay.
Any other questions?
So in terms of you have the acres.
Yes.
So the first is of the proposed solar siting area.
Correct.
Is basically 1,100 of 10,700 acres. In the siting area, that's across the project or in the one, I guess does it just affect the one particular
So
area?
that's inclusive of, there are 3 solar siting areas.
Yes.
There are 3 proposed solar arrays throughout the lease boundary, and this is a combination of all of those into this acreage total.
Okay.
The eastern solar array, as currently proposed, has a majority of the targeted wildlife habitat. There is a tiny bit in one of the 2 western solar siting areas, but the majority is within one of the 3.
And then again, and then 75 of the current proposed solar footprint. So that's where currently the solar arrays are now designed.
As currently proposed,
Okay.
yes. And 70, it's about 75, it's just over 75. 75 of them, of the acres, are in the eastern solar array, and I think 0.4 acres are in one of the 2 western solar arrays.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Okay. The next measure is Habitat 1, which is the prohibition of siting primary project components defined as solar arrays, wind turbines, and battery substations or battery stations in medium or higher linkage wildlife movement corridors, and the siting of secondary components, which is defined as all other project components, primarily transmission lines and roads, in high or above linkage wildlife movement corridors, unless sited alongside existing infrastructure. This measure was intended to address impacts from the project to wildlife movement corridors, and the affected project components that would be excluded from construction as a result of this measure is approximately 13% of the turbines, either for option 1 or option 2, about 6% of the proposed solar siting area, 0% of the current proposed solar footprint, and 3.4 miles of the optional 230 kilovolt 19.4 mile intertie transmission line, so about 17% of that line. And I should say, these acreages and percentages, there may be some overlap between or among these 3 mitigation measures. Are there any questions regarding Habitat 1?
Just a quick question, Mr. Green. Are these the mitigation measures as presented in the draft SCA that went to the governor's office, or are these the mitigation measures as they were presented in the final EIS?
These are the measures that were incorporated into the draft SCA that was submitted to the governor.
So do we have information on the differences between the measure as it was in the SCA versus the recommendation in the FEIS?
Yes, I can address it. For the first one, vegetation 10, that was created as part of the council deliberations after the FEIS. So there is no FEIS version of that, the final environmental impact statement. For Habitat 1, the version included in the final environmental impact statement did not include hard exclusion areas. It required that the applicant make an effort not to locate project components within these these medium and higher linkage wildlife movement corridors, but did not include exclusion areas. And also it required additional mitigation in the form of a wildlife corridor or a wildlife movement management plan or mitigation plan. Forget the terminology.
Other questions on this slide for Mr. Green? Go ahead.
I was just going to follow up, Chair, and just ask if this is helpful. Sure, this is very helpful. If we could see that with the EIS too, the side by side, it'd be very information. Thanks.
Sure. Are there any further questions on Habitat 1?
So essentially, I mean, if we were to do the comparison, there was no requirement of any turbine, any exclusion based on the FEIS.
Yes, the FEIS version would not result in a reduction in production potential for energy production potential for the project because it would just require additional mitigation for any components that were cited within these movement corridors.
You mentioned that there is some overlap with I'm assuming the species 5.
Yes.
So if 30 out of the 222 turbines, some of those are also covered in species 5 reductions as well?
I believe the majority are, if not all. It's possibly all of them are also covered by species 5. Any further questions? Okay. And the last of the three measures that would result in a reduction of energy production potential for the project is species 5, which is the prohibition of siting wind turbines within 2 miles of a documented ferruginous hawk nest, and the siting of solar arrays or BESSs within half a mile of a documented nest, and additionally requires mitigation for all components sited within 2 miles of a nest. This measure was intended to address project impacts to the ferruginous hawk, other avian wildlife, wildlife habitat, traditional cultural properties, visual aesthetics, safety for recreation, and aerial firefighting as part of public health and safety. And the project components that would potentially be excluded if this measure were to be implemented would be approximately 48% of the wind turbines, either for option 1 or option 2, approximately 30% of the proposed solar siting area, approximately 12% of the proposed solar footprint, and one of the 3 proposed BESS sites, though it should be noted that a maximum of 2 BESSs would be constructed with the final project as part of the draft SCA. Are there any questions for species 5?
I'm sure there will be.
Okay. Yes.
Oh, Mr. Probst, go ahead. Yeah.
Just one that I have, solar versus the wind turbines. Is the impacts the same? Or if you reduce wind turbines, you'll have more of an impact than you would with a solar panel. That makes sense.
Yeah, yes, I understand the question. The issue is they're different types of impact. The primary impact that solar has on the ferruginous hawk is the denial of access to potential foraging habitat, whereas the primary impact that wind turbines have is direct mortality through bird strikes as they try to access that foraging habitat. I will say in the discussions we've had with WDFW staff, they have indicated a greater concern with the impacts associated with wind turbines. Although that may be a result of the specific proposed outlay of this proposed layout of this project.
Thank you.
Chair Drew, if I may.
Yes.
We have some slides that have the FEIS measures. We could share some of those. I think species 5 might be one to go over, as that one relates to probably the greatest impact in terms of reduction of the output capacity of the project.
That would be great. Do we also have them in printed copies for us so we can actually see them?
We can get those.
Thank you. Do we need to pause our meeting in order to get those?
That would be great. Couple of
Okay,
minutes.
so let's take a very short break.
Thank you.
Mr. Green, on the options, the greater explanation of what was in the FEIS and the SCA of the options of that limit the energy production of the site. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Drew and Council. Going through the three options again, for vegetation 10, there was no FEIS version. There is other mitigation within the SCA and the FEIS that target vegetation generally and wildlife habitat, which would be inclusive of shrub steppe and rabbit brush shrubland, but there are no other mitigation measures that are exclusive to those two habitat types. Questions here? Okay. For Habitat 1, you have the full text there available to you, but the summation of the differences is the FEIS version requires that the applicant locate project components outside of medium and higher linkage areas to the extent feasible, and that they must provide a rationale and additional mitigation, including a corridor mitigation plan for any components cited within those medium and above linkage corridors, whereas the SCA version prohibits the citing of primary components of medium and above or secondary and high and above.
Questions? Let's talk about species 5.
Sure thing. So apologies, I think species 5 is, okay, it's on 2 slides. It is a very long mitigation measure, but again, in summation, the FEIS version requires that the applicant, FSEC, and the representatives of the PTAG, the pre-technical or the pre-operational technical advisory group, go through a process where they identify the availability of nesting sites for historically identified Phrygis hawk nests and the viability of foraging habitat within the 2-mile buffer home range of those nests. And if a determination is made that the nesting site is available and the habitat is viable, then there would be a 2-mile exclusion buffer placed on that nest for wind turbines specifically. For the 2-mile buffer surrounding nests, historic nests where one or both of those criteria were not reached, alternative mitigation was proposed in the FEIS, which would include things like monitoring wind turbine curtailment during periods of high activity and adaptive management based on the results of monitoring, including mortality events. Whereas the version that was included in the SCA has placed a 2-mile exclusion buffer on all historically documented Phrygis hawk nests and a 1/2-mile 2-mile buffer for wind turbines and a 1/2-mile buffer for solar arrays and batteries. And still requires that same additional mitigation process for all components cited within 1/2 mile to 2 miles, which by the nature of the SCA version would only include non-turbine project components.
So if we go to the FEIS. Okay. So we say available in the FEIS?
Correct, for the nesting site. And that's meant to indicate like the tree in which a historic nest was located or the rock outcropping where that historic nest was located. If that site itself is still present and available for renesting, then it would meet that criteria.
Because then you have non-viable, but up here, this is, okay.
Yes, viability is in relation to foraging habitat within the home range of the historic nest.
Chair Drew, if I could just, because it may not be clear to the council or potentially to people phoning in, where the slide says current as of 12/20/23, that was an error on my part, and it should indicate that that is the language that's within the SCA. It should not say
Oh,
as of 2020.
thank you. Okay, so up on the subtitle or on the title up at the top of the page, this is current as of the SCA as submitted.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Are there questions from council members? Do we know, the FEIS develops a process to determine what's available to the species, and that's in the actual nesting location, and viable as in the habitat. Do I have that
Correct.
right? Okay. Whereas the SCA said no turbines within the 2 miles of an historic nest.
Correct.
Is that correct? So we don't really know what the difference in, or do you have some information to provide to us about what's the difference in terms of the number of turbines
Yeah,
that would be eliminated?
You are correct. The process through which FSEC, the applicant, and the PTAG would identify available nesting sites and viable habitat has not begun, and it would go on prior to construction. So at this point, there's no way to really know how many turbines would still be excluded based on the FEIS version of the mitigation, other than the maximum amount would be the same as it was in the SCA, which is about 48%. The minimum, unlikely, but technically could be 0% of the turbines. So it's somewhere within that range of 0 to 48%.
Are there other questions? And if we do, as we go into the discussion, have questions, we can bring Mr. Green into our conversation, Ms. Hofkemeyer, if that makes sense to council members. So if we're ready to now move into the discussion, we have the governor's request for reconsideration. And as I look at it, and I'll ask for comments from everybody, I guess what I'm struck with is asking us to look to our own record to see if there are ways to more narrowly tailor the specific impacts identified, and not to really compound the multiple impacts into a general prohibition. That's how I read it. I know other people have other comments they'd like to make on the general letter overall. And Mr. Brost, if you're ready, I think you wanted to talk a little bit about that. Oh, your microphone needs to be on. There you go, you're on.
So the first question I have is on that second bullet point on the governor's direction for reconsideration. First bullet, it's more narrowly tailored project to the specific impacts identified. The second bullet, consistent with achieving full or near clean energy generation. It seems like those two could be direct opposites. Am I reading that right? Or is that a question we should talk about when we?
Thank you. Just trying to get the right page in front of me. And your question is, are they contradictory?
Like the two bullets are direct opposites, I think. And can we have both? It's kind of like one or the other to a large extent, isn't it?
I think
Or
the
am I-
point again that the governor was making as I read it is that when we made the recommendation to exclude turbines within a certain area, it was a compounding of issues, not specifically tailored to each issue, such as just the ferruginous hawk, just the visual, just the cultural resources. And so the way I read the governor's request to us is asking us to tailor our mitigation to specific impacts. And his goal, as he states it, is to achieve the full or near full clean energy generation capacity of the proposed project. But now would be the time for discussion, and I think, Mr. Brost, you had some comments you wanted to make overall in terms of some of the other issues such as need.
So I'm going to share just a few thoughts. I don't have anything written down here. Okay. But my thoughts come from my role as a project manager for Bonneville Power Administration, involved in the building and operation oversight. Okay, we weren't doing the actual work, but Energy Northwest, various different entities were doing the actual work, but Bonneville was funding all of the activity. But what I was going to say is that, now I forgot what I was going to say. But the location of the project in this particular sense, without substantial reductions, is not going to solve the problem of any of the species. The project itself, wind power, we keep talking, not we, but in the letters, the size of the project is 1,500 megawatts, pick a number. That number doesn't mean anything when it comes to the operation of the system. And these renewable projects, whether it's solar or wind, have a drastic impact on the reliability of the system, especially in different areas. Like we have probably one of the worst areas for wind, probably one of the best areas, but it's still not very good over in that area of Washington. And whether you have a turbine that produces 10 megawatts, but the wind needs to be blowing to get that 10 megawatts. And that's what I don't see in any of this, is that we're talking about the size of a project. And there's a lot of good numbers. When it comes down to the actual generation, you've got different parts of the system, nuclear plants, coal, hydro projects that now are kind of getting an endangered species themselves, I think, sounds like. But in any event, all of those pieces come together to keep this system operating. And just 2 weeks ago, I'm part of our Kiwanis back in the Tri-Cities. We always have a guest speaker come in. And I didn't have anything to do with the speaker. I didn't know it was coming, but the manager for Benton PUD was our speaker that day. And he had several slides that he was sharing with the group. And one of the slides he had was the reliability of the system and what impacts are. And I think before we decide, I would recommend, if it's possible for the council to do, this is my first shot at this, so I don't know. But I think it would be real wise and real important for this council. Again, I don't know exactly what our charter is or how we can do this, but it seems to me that is a major issue that we should deal with before we say yes or no to this project. What is the system implications of a project like this versus the system that we have? And does it make sense? Is it economically, is it smart for us? I don't want my power going out middle of January, which I've been there. But in any event, all of this stuff, how this system is put together, taking out what I call firm resources versus these not so firm resources. You know, when the wind blows, when the sun shines, you never know. And you turn on a nuclear plant or a coal plant or a dam for most part. It's when you turn it on, it's there for you. So anyway, I have a system perspective of this stuff, and that's why I have reservations about this project, if that makes sense.
Thank you, and thanks for your comments. It's not truly within our purview to look at it vis-a-vis the system. We're looking at the project and the specific impacts to it. So, Ms. Bumpus, would you like to?
Well, I was just going to say that, you know, I think that staff's approach to this has been based off the letter from the governor that the record's complete, the information's there, all the information needed to retailor, if you will, some of the conditions that would allow greater output capacity. All of that is there, all the information's there in the record. And so staff have looked to that to see if there are measures that can be revised, implemented, that would allow greater build out, but still provide protection to the resource. And so that's been our approach to this. And so we're I don't know if that's helpful, but we're looking at it very, you know, narrowly. The council's made a recommendation on this project to recommend approval with conditions. And I think now before us is just looking at this again to see, are there still protections we can put in place, but that allow for greater output?
Thank you. Are there additional comments from council members in terms of looking at this review process and what we, I agree. Certainly, I think we should look within our existing record, so not to bring anything new or any additional subject matters into it. What are the council's views? And if so, what are the parts of the record that we would like to look at more closely? Any comments? We've got Mike Livingston and then you.
Thank you. Well, just generally first, it seems the difference here is where we landed with a recommendation of the governor was there was some substantial avoidance measures put in place that were covering these various issues that were in the presentation. It wasn't just, even though it's labeled species 5, we were talking about the substantial comments we got from Yakima Nation on cultural resources, and then also the visual impacts that we heard from the community loud and clearly. So the balance that I feel we struck with the recommendation to the governor was there's a project here that's permittable, and it balances it with the impacts that we heard both at the social as well as the biological concerns that we heard very clearly through the deliberative process. Some of the measures that were in the final EIS that I had concerns with that were specific to the biological was I couldn't tell you what the project looked like in the end because I didn't know what we were voting on. Because if the PTAG had that process set up, the number of turbines that would get built out would be determined later. And so how large was the project going to be? We were voting on it with an impression of one size, and it felt like it could potentially come back significantly different than what we were asked to be voting on. So I had some real reservations with that PTAG measure that was in there with the assessment of the viability of those nest sites. So I see the governor's recommendation is narrowing that down. I don't know exactly how we do that when we have these multiple issues and values that we're trying to balance with the renewable energy goals that we have in the state. And so where we landed, I was in favor of it. I voted for it. Where we're headed, I don't know what it's going to look like, and I don't know how I'll feel about that. But I just wanted to put out some more general observations about the whole lengthy, very, the staff did a wonderful job, a ton of work, a lot of back and forth with agency staff, and I was, I felt that it was the right thing that we proposed, but the governor has his say, and that's where we are today. And so I do have concerns if we're going to significantly reduce the avoidance measures that we came up with and end up in a place where it's much more like the FEIS. So just some general statements, Chair.
Yeah.
I'm in a different position than the majority of the council. Obviously, I voted to not move ahead with the project as it was originally composed and in the SCA. And I'm concerned about a lot of the language in what the governor provided in terms of becoming more focal, and also with some of the information that Mr. Green presented to us about how the project could potentially be reconfigured to restore more of the original number of turbines, more of the original energy production that was envisioned. Because to me, if I didn't feel that the first proposal to the governor sufficiently reduced impacts to Yakima Nation traditional cultural properties, and anything that puts more turbines back on the land increases the infrastructure footprint is going to make a revised recommendation of the governor even worse when it comes to Yakima Nation traditional cultural properties. So that's a big thing that I'm thinking about right now.
The comments? Okay.
There's a reason I let Mike do the mic. Thank you. I also have concerns, I think, about what we're being asked to reconsider. I am certainly willing to reconsider the measures the governor has requested that we take a look at, but I don't want to come across as pre-approving, so to speak, the full or near full clean energy generation capacity of the proposed project. I think we'd have to do a lot of, I don't know that we have in the record enough to support that going that far.
This is Eli Levitt, Department of Ecology. I guess, maybe in response to Mr. Brost's comments earlier, I come from a different system of thinking, which is more around climate policy and energy policy historically, not an engineer's perspective, perhaps. And, this is the hard part of what we're doing is we're balancing trade-offs. and we only get to make a decision on this particular project, right? So I guess from my perspective, I think I owe it to current populations, but also future generations to look closely at the world we live in and the emissions that come from our actions. And regardless of whether from an engineering perspective, this is really reliable, we need dramatically more renewable energy in the system, in the state, in the system globally to have a sustainable future. My children, my grandchildren, all of our children, it's difficult for me to think that we're at the pace we need to be at to have a more sustainable future, even just if you break it down to a state or a region. I guess for those reasons, I'm wondering if maybe most of us could live with some of these mitigation measures and even potentially introduce a few more that might be a compromise. For example, we all heard that the visual impacts were considerable and significant for the people that provided public comment and the people living in the area. Could we, the scope of the scale is so large, could we consider asking the staff to tell us how many turbines are within half a mile to a mile of any residence or any business, and we could consider a slightly larger buffer, like a mile or more, for example. Another option perhaps would be to ask staff, are there specific traditional cultural properties, cultural resources, where we could ask the applicant to consider pushing back a little bit farther? I don't think it would have, I don't know the numbers. I'm not an expert like Mr. Green or Ms. Hofkemeyer, but I don't think it would have a dramatic impact on energy generation, but it would indicate that we're taking this feedback and trying to consider the footprint of the overall project. So there are a few tribal cultural properties in my mind, or traditional cultural properties, where you could, look at how many turbines are proposed within half a mile and potentially move that more out to a mile, perhaps. So I guess these are things I'm thinking about, but I don't have a much more firm proposal than that.
This is Stacy Brewster. I want to echo a bit of what Mike said. I appreciate the balance we struck, and I think that was important to us. And for instance, say the species 5 mitigations did indeed cover other compounding aspects we needed to consider. So I think, we discussed some of the FES mitigations for those 3 things, but I think we'll have to do considerable more consideration for visual aspects, fire fighting, and protection of traditional cultural properties. So if we're going to break them down specifically, that might lead to more available build out. I don't know that it will. So, but I would think we would have to approach those individually. And I think we've got some work to do if we're going to follow through.
Yes.
Should have identified myself last time. This is Elizabeth Osborne from Commerce. I share Councilmember Levitt's concerns about the amount of clean energy that we're going to need. I'm not convinced that the size of this particular project will be the only way to achieve it. And so I keep going back to the very difficult balance that we struck in our recommendation to the governor. And that's where my hesitance comes, why I said what I said about not wanting to in any way preemptively or pre-approvingly indicate that we'd like to see this project be a certain size. I think we have in front of us a set of impacts that are real and they're there. And so if they're there, I don't think we actually have the ability to approve things that would worsen those impacts. So I think I just wanted to respond that I also am concerned about growing the amount of clean energy that we need to serve Washington customers, but I'm not sure that that needs to come at the cost of some of the impacts that we saw in the record. Thank you.
In terms of my perspective, I do think it's, I think it makes sense to look more specifically at impacts and not combine them together in the compounding that we did. I think a lot of it, even though we did talk about it in compounding, it did rest on specifically the species 5 and the recommendation for the 2-mile buffer for nests. Myself, when this came up, I went back and I reviewed the adjudication because I thought that that's really where the council formed a very strong view of the concern about the ferruginous hawk specifically. And I reviewed specifically Don McIver's testimony. And what I realized as I listened to that is that when we're, and I'm not a specialist in biology or wildlife management in any way, shape, or form, but specifically in that instance, in an endangered hawk, the probability of a strike because of the few numbers is low, but the impact of a strike is high. So where on the dial do we, look at that particular impact, and how is it best for us, not knowing the future, to really try and identify avoidance is one, but it's the risk. I mean, part of that risk is also there won't be any. So I think we look at the avoidance side of it, and it's a real struggle, no question about it. But on the other hand, the impact of that to the project overall was substantial. So I do have questions about looking at perhaps the curtailment that was talked about, the fact that it's going to be at least a couple of years before we have the project, if it were approved, actually goes to construction. So we have years where I think it would be advisable, for example, for FSEC to have a consultant that reports to our staff. I don't think we would want to just ask the applicant to do that, for example, and provide that information. And I am sensitive to the back and forth that you were talking about, and you have before, Mike, about Mr. Livingston, about the Fish and Wildlife staff. So that's why I think it's important perhaps for that to be centered on someone that FSEC would hire to lead that type of effort. But we really don't know what the next few years will bring us in information about the hawk usage of that site either, or in the region. And I think those uncertainties caused us very much to reduce the project footprint. And I think there are ways we could look at, specifically again, talking about that, ways that we can see what our ongoing review of the site by somebody that is brought on by FSEC will provide information to the staff to identify where those really viable areas are on the site. And that does leave an open question. But it's both, in my mind, protective. And yet if then we could even, for example, limit the construction to periods of time outside of the times when the hawk would be there. So I think there are possibilities to put together maybe perhaps what Mr. Levitt was talking about to more specifically tailor impacts that would increase the potential for power generation at the site. So that's where I am. I guess I would ask if there's a motion to request the staff to develop from the record some specific mitigations for us to consider for the next meeting. Is that a motion anyone wishes to put forward?
This is Eli Levitt. I'll put forward this motion.
Second,
Stacy Brewster, second.
discussion?
Yeah, Mike Livingston. What are we asking them specifically to do? We asking, well, we're going to get a request for a motion next month or August to vote on some measures that staff have come up with? Or are we going to get more information and understanding of what the impacts potentially? I heard a lot of questions, including my own, about what is this, if we were to reduce the avoidance measures, what does this look like and how does that impact all of those values that we were trying to protect?
Thank you, Councilmember Livingston, for the question. By the way, this is Sonia Bumpus for the record. I think staff would continue to look at what we can glean from our mitigation measures in the FEIS, what they offer in terms of mitigating impacts. We already know that the original recommendation included avoidance measures, essentially. And so what we would be presenting to you at the next meeting would be probably a combination of things that were in the FEIS, perhaps some of the things that Chair Drew mentioned, perhaps additional monitoring, data collection at the outset for the site prior to operation. But it would probably be a tailoring of measures that you could look at that would not offer avoidance necessarily, but still protection. We're happy to bring the information into, from the FEIS and talk about that as well. We can go over those measures in more detail and look at what they offer, but based off what I'm hearing, it sounds like we're still wanting to look at avoidance to some degree. There's concern about, for just as an example, relying on curtailment, for instance, solely. I'm not getting the sense that that's something that the council's comfortable with. So I think we would be looking at the FEIS measures and then perhaps adding a few more things that would help to answer some of those questions.
Comments? So there's a motion on the floor. I would ask all those in favor to say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. And I encourage all of the council members to contact staff if you'd like to talk further. And we will try to then have more specific options developed for the July meeting. Okay? Thank you. We now move into the other. Yes, there's a back to the agenda. To staff introductions, Ms. Bumpus.
Thank you, Chair Drew and council members. For the record, this is Sonia Bumpus. I just wanted to let everyone know that we are welcoming a new employee to the FSEC staff, Martin McMurray here. He joined FSEC on June 10th and is our Director of Administration. He has over 22 years experience with the state. He's also worked private sector on budgets, financial advisements. He has a vast array of experience, and we are really excited that he's chosen to join the FSEC team. So please join me in welcoming Martin to our team.
Thank you, Director Bumpus, for that warm introduction. Chair Drew, council members, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here with FSEC. Like Director Bumpus mentioned, 22-year state career in state government. My most recent post was actually at the Department of Commerce, where I was a budget director, CFO, and the chief operating officer. So I was bring those skills and help the team out, and everyone's been very gracious in day 7 for me. So again, thank you.
Welcome. Ms. Hofkemeyer.
Thank you, Chair Drew. Council, I would also like to introduce another new staff member. Trevin Taylor is our new SEPA specialist. So he will be joining Sean in tackling the SEPA review for the projects in front of us. Trevin's first day was Monday, so we thought we could just pop him in the deep end.
No detailed questions yet?
Maybe like a couple more days, I think would probably be a good idea. But Trevin has a great background in both SEPA and NEPA experience, working at both the state and the county level. So.
Yeah, thank you for having me and for this opportunity. Yeah, I have about 25, 26 years of experience in environmental compliance and also biological support. Trained as a habitat biologist, fish specialist for the most part, and then have been processing NEPA, SEPA, pretty much any permit that's been out there for as part of that process for many years. So once again, thank you for having me, and looking forward to the opportunity.
Welcome. And with that, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you all, and it's good to see you all in person.